The Flying Tigers were a group of American mercenary fighter pilots who were under contract by the Chinese, who secretly helped China fend off the Japanese military just before and during World War II. During the Second Sino-Japanese War, the Japanese took all of Manchuria and most of China. The United States wanted to help but didn't want to fully enter the war, so they compromised with China and agreed to send some undercover pilots, planes, and funding. With this assistance, the Chinese and Americans worked together to defeat the Japanese. The Japanese Zero came bearing down at 330 miles per hour. We both had our machine guns blaring, and just as we were about to collide, he blew up right in front of me. I never touched a piece of the wreckage either.
This is just one of the stories of the famed Flying Tigers. The battle for China officially began in 1931, when Japan, who was very poor at the time, decided to invade China for money and resources. China, who had been weakened by many years of civil war between the Chinese warlords, put up almost no resistance when the Japanese invaded Manchuria in northeast China. The Japanese aggression escalated in the following years, killing millions of Chinese, both military and civilian. In late 1937, over a 6-week period, Imperial Japanese Army forces brutally murdered hundreds of thousands of people, both citizens and soldiers, in the Chinese city of Nanking. Nanking at the time was the capital of socialist China. Now it was left in ruins and would take years to rebuild. England, the US, and France all tried to stop the bloodthirsty Japanese through politics and sanctions, but to no avail. If China was going to win the war, they would need outside help. Captain Claire Lee Chenault wanted to be a World War I pilot but failed to enroll before the war ended. However, once the First World War was over, he spent his time leading the Army Air Corps flying team as a pilot, doing acrobatic maneuvers in a group called 3 Men on a Flying Trapeze. He was the best pilot around and could do a variety of tricks, including a famous stunt where a rope was tied from the right wing of Chenault's plane to the left wing of Chenault's friend, Billy McDonald's plane. The 20-foot rope was tied so the pilots would have to fly no farther than 20 feet apart, or they would rip their wing braces off and most likely spin out of control. While this 20-foot rope was tied to each wing, which was a feat all by itself, they would do tricks like loops and their craziest stunt, a 360 barrel roll.
One day, while doing his show for the last time before he retired, what Chenault didn't know was that in the audience was Chinese Air Force General Mao Ping-so. So was looking for a pilot to lead and organize this horrible team of Chinese Air Force pilots who were trying to provide cover for the Chinese ground troops who were trying to stop the invading Japanese troops. Chenault accepted and joined the Chinese Nationalist Air Force as a colonel. He tried his best to educate the young pilots, but because there was a lot of political pressure and there wasn't that many planes, he had to send almost all of them away to complete their training. President Roosevelt, however, was looking for a way to help the Chinese and let Chenault return to China on a huge boat along with 100 P-40B fighters.
President Roosevelt had also drafted and signed a secret order allowing for U.S. military Air Force personnel and ground support to go over to China along with 100 P-40B fighter planes. They had to go undercover with fake passports and fake occupations, such as carpenter, sheet metal worker, musician, electrician, missionary, etc., so the Japanese wouldn't think the U.S. was siding with the Chinese. Once the men arrived in China with the 100 planes, they began to practice on a British shared training field. They weren't as skilled as they had claimed to be during the sign-ups, and by the time that they were ready for battle, 3 men were dead and 44 aircraft were unusable due to pilot failure, Allison thrust-bearing failures in the engines, and quote, Murphy's Law. However, right after Pearl Harbor occurred, the Flying Tigers were up in the sky and shot up Japanese planes as well as ground targets to keep the Burma Road clear, which was now the biggest Chinese supply line because Japan had taken almost all of China's seaports. They did so well, they were all over the news, in the US and in Britain. The Chinese people helped a ton during the air fights and had a communication set up with 165 radios spread out bigger than the state of Texas. It worked like this. If someone who had a radio saw a group of planes, they would report where they were, what direction the planes were headed, and how many planes there were. If they were flying in the direction of an American airbase, Chenault would order some of his men up into the air when the Japanese planes were about 50 miles away. They would then fly very high. Once they were above the Japanese, they would dive with extreme speed, scaring the Japanese out of formation, making them easy targets to pick off one by one. This method saved thousands of gallons of aviation fuel. Plus, the Flying Tigers didn't have to hunt down the Japanese. The Japanese just flew right towards them. This strategy worked till the end of the war. Since Chenault was the leader, and they couldn't risk him being killed in training, he just taught the American mercenaries to fly the P-40s. He also taught the crew to fix and maintain the planes. The crew members and crew chiefs would get up in the morning and service the planes. This meant they would put the bombs under the wings, fill them up with fuel, and put oil in the aircraft. Chenault taught the pilots many things about aerial combat and was like a coach to his team. He was known to be like a drill sergeant since he was pretty rude. He had a lot of experience and knowledge that he passed on to the pilots. He was extremely smart, despite the fact he was not a graduate of West Point or any other military school besides the Air Corps, and he always explained all of his plans to his pilots and made them practice the plans until it became routine. People have always had mixed opinions about Chenault. Some thought he was amazing.
He was skilled, he was determined.
When we interviewed last surviving member and crew chief of the Flying Tigers, Frank Lazansky, he said that he thought Chenault had a good sense for tactics and strategy, but he didn't think too highly of his character.
He wasn't worth it.
He was one thing for certain, though. He was very single-minded about helping the Chinese and married a Chinese woman at the end of the war. Almost all of the Flying Tigers also learned to love the Chinese, especially because of how helpful they were. When we interviewed crew chief Frank Lazansky, he said they were there when you needed them.
To help you with anything that you wanted help with. They would never refuse you.
After the war was over, Chenault helped construct an airline to disperse relief throughout the country of China. After this, he retired officially and finished the rest of his life in his hometown of New Orleans, Louisiana, where he died of lung cancer at the age of 64. In just 7 famous months, these American mercenaries shot down 296 Japanese planes with 300 more possibles, killed 1,500 pilots, bombardiers, navigators, and gunners, destroyed 573 bridges, 1,300 riverboats, tons of road vehicles, and killed thousands of Japanese army soldiers. The Chinese people were very grateful to have the Flying Tigers in the middle of this conflict with Japan. They were also very grateful for Mr. Roosevelt's secret compromise by forming the Tigers. As a result of this compromise, the Americans were able to help the Chinese hold back the Japanese and keep them from fully taking over China. Once the Flying Tigers' 7-month contract ended, they were disbanded in the middle of World War II. However, they were given the option to join the U.S. Air Force, which was now in China, but only 5 of the Tigers joined. The rest of the Tigers went back to America and lived their lives out with fond memories of their time spent in China.
These in the day when heaven was falling, the hour when earth's foundation fled, following the mercenary column, took their wages and are dead. Their shoulders held the sky suspended. They stood and the earth's foundation stay. What God abandoned, these defended, and saved the some things for pay.